If you're ever looking for office space, obviously go to phase 2. It's an amazing spot. And then Semio has been one of our long-term sponsors. Here's Ross to talk about what Semio does.
You can't get rid of me. No, so I'm also the founder and CEO of Semio, a sponsor for tonight's event. We're building an operating system, app ecosystem, and developer tools for personal robots. So think about what Microsoft Windows did for personal computing. We're doing for the robots that are going to be in your homes and workplaces in the not too distant future. We are currently hiring. So if you are a full stack engineer, front end, back end, software engineer, basically anyone working in web development, come and talk to me. You don't have to have a background in robotics, so don't be intimidated by that, but come and talk to me. I would love to chat with you.
And we had Lockman Law that really helped us with some of our legal work, and then also Savalas, which is a commercial real estate firm. So thank you all for contributing, coming out. Thanks to our sponsors, our venues, and we are live right now. So if you missed anything, you want to share this with your mom, your friends, whatever, it's all live streamed on Facebook, and we'll be uploading a high quality version on YouTube. Next, we have a really amazing presenter that's going to present what XPrize is all about. Who here knows what XPrize is? Awesome. I was on a really amazing trip a couple weeks ago where we all went out to Geneva for the AI for Good Global Summit, and it was really amazing to see how many amazing people around the world are really focusing on how can we use AI and these new technologies to really help solve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, to really help, all of the world, make the world a better place, right? The cliche term that all of us startup entrepreneurs try to abide by. But before we get started with the whole programming, we'd love to have Nima come up and talk about XPrize and the great work that they're doing. So give it up for Nima.
Thank you. I promise this won't be long. So, hi, my name is Nima Kuniko. I'm the technical lead for the AI XPrize, and I'm here to talk to you about our 5 AI principles. So, for those who don't know, XPrize is the world's leading prize organization. We use incentivized prizes to drive innovation and challenge humanity to solve the grand challenges that face us throughout the world. The IBM Watson AI XPrize is one of those XPrizes. It's a $5 million XPrize that challenges teams from all around the world. We have 32 currently, to use AI for good and to use AI to solve these grand challenges. So this is an example of AI in action and AI for good in action. Now, as part of XPrize, both in terms of things like the AI XPrize, the AI for Good Global Summit, which you just mentioned, which we do with the United Nations every year in Geneva, Switzerland, our work with the Data Commons, also our work with our partnerships like the Partnership on AI and AILA as well. We have these AI principles that we use to guide our work and to let us know, what to do and what not to do. And I'd like to share those with you today. First, AI should be diverse. So data is the lifeblood of AI, and diversity in data is essential to making sure that AI serves everyone. If you don't use diverse AI, diverse data in your AI, then it will only serve those classes of people that you include in your data. It will only perform for them. And what I mean by different types of diversity in data, I'm talking not only race, ethnicity, gender, religion, things like that, but also geographic location, socioeconomic status, and many other categories as well. So you need to be very careful and actually use diversity when you are building your AI and you're building your data sets from the start. AI should be inclusive. If you want to have robust AI systems that work for all of society, then AI needs to be accessible to all. At XPrize, one of the most important ethoses that we have is that ideas and solutions can come from anywhere in the world. And if you don't give access to those people to have AI tools and voice in the creation of AI, then they will not be served in those areas as well. And it's actually very important because you never know where the next idea, the next innovation, the next breakthrough, where it's going to come from. And if you don't let those voices be included when you're building your AI, then they won't be a part of that innovation. AI should be ethical. That's probably why you're all here. Ethical AI is important because AI is a dual-use technology. So it can be used for good, but it can also be used for evil. And when we are building AI, we need to keep that in mind, that we need to build ethical and trustworthy AI. Otherwise, we can forget things, and we can actually build negative AI, intentionally or unintentionally. At XPrize, we have something called the AI ethical framework that we use. It empowers teams, both teams, startups, research organizations, to actually keep ethics at front of mind when they're building the technology and when they are competing in our competitions, to make sure that ethical AI is a part of what they're building. AI should be inspirational. AI is going to lead to really awesome future breakthroughs, but more often than not, we see in society, people are afraid of AI. They are afraid of the negative stories, the dystopian outcomes. As people active in AI ourselves, it is up to us to inspire people to share the positive stories and the positive future outcomes that AI may have moving forward. A good example of this is the AI XPrize, which actually demonstrates real-world AI for good in action and shows people that AI can actually be used to solve those grand challenges and can be inspirational as well. AI should be leveraged to tackle grand challenges. AI should not just be in the domain of business or private industry. AI should also be used to solve those humanitarian challenges and those 17 Sustainable Development Goals, to use those to actually tackle those problems. If we don't do that, then we will miss out on the scope, on the speed, and on the success that those AI breakthroughs can bring in the area of humanitarian challenges themselves. So those are the 5 principles that we use at XPrize when we're working on ethical AI and AI in general. If you have any questions about that, you can definitely visit xprize.org. You can also come and talk to me as well. And my name is Nima, and I'm from XPrize. Thank you.
All right. And then without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Arturo Perez, one of our advisors, a good friend, and our moderator, your moderator for today. So here's Arturo Perez.
Thank you, Todd. Hey, everybody. As Todd said, my name is Arturo, and we are good friends. I'm the CEO of Kluge, and we're a design studio here in LA. So my interest in this topic is coming from how to make the human side of things, the liberal arts side of things. And I'm also excited to have some designer friends with me today. We have Jasmine here, who's going to do a little bit of visual annotation. She's a wonderful illustrator. And we got Jenny somewhere. Where are you, Jenny? Ah, Jenny's right there. She's going to do some workshop with us. So please stay tuned. We're going to try to make sure that this is a nicely time-constrained, time-box, as we designers like to do, panel, so that we have some time for the workshop. It's going to get us a little bit interactive and get us to think about morality. So please stay tuned throughout the event. But I'm excited because ethics and philosophy have always been dear to my heart. And this is an opportunity to explore it. And ethics is a big topic, and ethics in AI is a mind-boggling topic, which is great because we have a very nice range here from practicing to theory, from academia, policy making. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our panelists, both Brian and Peter and Ammon and Aina. And please give them a round of applause. And please come on and sit down. You may or may not sit right under your face. It's up to you guys. Cool. So before we get started, I'd love to get to know the audience a little bit. How many of you are data scientists or computer engineers, software engineers? Raise your hands. Cool. A nice group of you. How many of you are practicing artificial intelligence or AI today? All right. So a little bit of the room. And how many of you are designers? Designers. Cool. You guys are clustered over there. It's nice. Cool. How many of you practice ethics here? All right. That's cool. I think we all do it in our own way, right? Cool. So I'm excited to have you guys today. What we're going to do today, just give a little framing. The idea is we have a nice range here between practicing and theory, and we want to sort of discover a little bit of poke at how do we get from ethical principles to action and to technology, and also look at it from the issues facing us today. And the ones facing us tomorrow. What should we be afraid of, or not? What's the opportunity? So let's start with a little bit of the introduction. So tell me a little bit about who you are, your background, and what is your background, especially when it comes to ethics?
Should I start?
Yeah, that's good.
Do you have a mic for me? So my name is Peter Eckersley. I'm the Director of Research at an organization called the Partnership on AI. Before joining PEI recently, last year, I spent a long time at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a digital civil liberties organization. So my background was confronting questions like privacy, freedom of speech, computer security, network neutrality, how we ensure the architecture of the internet works to serve ordinary human needs. And at PEI, I'm working on a similar set of questions around the relationship between humanity and artificial intelligence. PEI is a multi-stakeholder organization that gathers 90 partners. We were created by the major tech companies, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, IBM, Amazon, but they've been joined by a very large number of civil society organizations, including EFF, ACLU, AI Now, Data and Society, the Future of Humanity Institute, the Future of Life Institute, and a lot of academic research labs. And so those partners are working together to try to pose and answer the hard questions about AI ethics. In particular, that turns into questions like, the state of California just last year passed a law mandating the use of AI tools to decide on the detention or release of everyone in the criminal justice system prior to trial. So that's on any given night, 65,000 people who are either in jail or not in jail, depending on the output of an algorithmic system. So we viewed that as a super urgent, potentially problematic thing that was happening, and it was our mission to sit down and figure out, okay, are these tools ready for that purpose? The answer is largely no. And then what would it take theoretically to make AI ready for such a high stakes application? Or if you can't get it ready, then how do you avoid using AI in this way at all? So that's an example. We're tackling similar questions on the future of labor and the economy and the way that that will be impacted by AI, on the safety of AI systems and how you design them to avoid unintended consequences, and misspecified objectives, which are huge, profound, difficult technical problems that then flow into practical problems like how do we ensure that the optimization of a social media newsfeed doesn't mess up your political system. So those questions about user interface design, how humans should interact with machine learning systems around them. And so we're just spinning up a new research organization and honestly hiring one at the moment to tackle all of these questions.
Hey everyone, my name is Ammon Haggerty, and I'm the head of design and a co-founder at a company called Formation. We're based in San Francisco. And you probably haven't heard of us, but you've probably, or there's a good chance you've used our product. We power the loyalty programs for Starbucks and United Airlines. And we do this using kind of advanced machine learning, gamification techniques, behavioral psychology, and we blend all that together to try to nudge people towards new behaviors. And you know, as a designer, and you know, really focused on the relationship with the user, you know, my natural kind of focus there is really around the ethics of what we're doing, and it often involves engaging with our customers and executive level, you know, stakeholders around the different types of you know, of engagement that we can have using machine intelligence. Before that, I was at Microsoft, where we leveraged, our team leveraged machine intelligence to build intelligent agents. I was involved in Cortana, a bunch of experimental agent projects. We worked on HoloLens and a bunch of other fun projects. So my focus there was also on the ethics of machine learning, machine intelligence.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Greene. I'm the Director of Technology Ethics at the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. Some of the things we work on there are AI ethics, which is why I'm here today. But we also work on doing workshops in technology ethics at corporations. We also have a bunch of resources on our website, which we try to get out there so people can think about ethics and technology. And basically, as an applied ethics center, the idea is that we're always trying to take ethics, which is this, potentially abstract philosophical discipline, and make sure that it's actually on the ground where people can actually use it. So we try to come up with tools that people can actually apply to their work and figure out how to actually make better decisions in the place where they are, right? Because when you have to deal with stuff, you actually have to make the right decision. And so we hope to be able to share those tools so that people can work on them. I also do other fun things in technology ethics like space ethics and stuff with human enhancement and things like that.
Hello, my name is Aina Agarwal, and I am on the AI and machine learning team at the World Economic Forum up in San Francisco. So the forum established the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution a few years ago, and there are 9 portfolio areas, and each one tracks onto a different emerging technology. And the premise is that we do pilot projects by bringing multiple stakeholders to the table with the goal of implementing those projects in one or more jurisdictions, learning and iterating from those implementations, and scaling those forward. So for example, we're doing a project right now on government procurement with the UK government as a partner, but we also operate in different ways where we're doing a project on children's rights and AI with UNICEF as a partner. So leveraging the convening power of the World Economic Forum, which has traditionally been an events-based organization, to see how we can create a platform to bring these policies forward. My background is as a human rights lawyer by training, and before that I was a corporate lawyer actually here in the startup community in Los Angeles and Venice, doing corporate transactional work for startups. So that's my background.
Cool. And by the way, fun fact, these guys are all traveling from up north, so thank you for flying down to Los Angeles to come talk to us. So love to talk about ethics today, basically what's happening on the ground floor. And feel free, it doesn't have to be one by one, like feel free to, we'd like to make this a dialogue as much as possible. So what are some of the good uses and bad uses that are coming out of this technology today?
I mean, I can kick off, just a perspective from applied AI or applied machine learning, within the corporate space. And I think this is something that we struggle with quite a bit, is, when faced with a decision of really kind of maximizing profit or maximizing kind of the human benefit, businesses generally go towards maximizing profit. And I think a lot of this is, built around a short-sighted relationship with their profits, and you're really not being used to trying to make decisions that are a little bit longer term, even though I think there is a tremendous benefit to having machine learning optimized for kind of customer engagement, customer happiness. That's often a much longer kind of engagement cycle to actually see those benefits. So what we've seen, in our own company, is our customers generally maximizing on revenue, even if we're trying to encourage them to focus on balance. And really, there is a wide range of opportunity for them to learn and explore. But it comes back to kind of business culture, and I think business culture is what's driving a lot of challenges around making kind of ethical decisions in machine learning right now.
I mean, I think as designers, we look at objectives, and it seems like business objectives are always trumping ethical concerns and ethical frameworks. So, yeah. Anyone else?
You go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, we see a lot of great uses that range from the regular application of machine learning to just do something that technology already does better. You know, at some point, Google rolled out machine learning to answer search queries for very rare search terms that had never been typed in before. That turned out to be like quite a large fraction of the time. And that produced much better results. Okay, so that's a use that you look at and say, okay, this makes people's lives slightly better. They get more relevant search results. There are other sort of more intentionally good uses. We helped to co-host a workshop at the Computer Vision Conference, CVPR, here in LA over the weekend. And there were a lot of people there doing projects that were just taking satellite imagery and trying to use machine learning and computer vision to better understand crisis situations and how you might constructively intervene in them, or using computer vision to look at crops and figure out, oh, are there diseases that need to be tackled in these crops? Like, what are they? What's going on? Like, what actions can we take as a result? And those are intentionally like going out with machine learning and trying to solve practical problems that people have. And then you have these very complicated and messy situations like the one I mentioned before, where the state of California and many counties around the rest of the United States are saying we want to use machine learning to predict whether humans in the criminal justice system are going to recidivate. And this is sort of a well-intentioned use of machine learning. Like the aim was to move away from a very punitive basis of handling of defendants in that system and move towards an evidence-based one. But it turned out that the machine learning classifiers, the supervised classifiers, very simple logistic regression systems, were being trained on terrible data. And that even if you had clean data, there are these subtle but profound problems like omitted variable bias that were leading to false positive rates that were like twice as high for African American defendants as you would have for white defendants. And so when you are making uses like that of machine learning with unintended consequences like that, I think you'd have to say the current situation is bad. And then we encountered a lot of disagreement about whether some other like considerably improved use of that kind of machine learning could be a good thing.
Okay, so I guess what I would say is that AI is going to take everything about human intelligence and light it on fire, right? So, and both for good or for bad. So in good ways, it allows us to have a lot more powers than we had before. In bad ways, it's going to allow us to mess things up more than we ever had before. And since if you're making kind of exploratory actions in the world, you're much more likely to make bad things happen rather than good things. We're kind of discovering that right now. And I think that what we're going to find out is, as we've already seen in some of the ways that machine learning is being used in the world, have already started having negative effects. So we've seen these things happening in terms of like Peter was saying with the social media and the flow of information through society having negative effects on the political system. There are also going to be a lot of psychological effects. This is something that I think people are discovering in terms of addiction and addictive apps. And these are going to have ramifications for society, right? And it also, the whole attention economy is kind of preying on that human psychological vulnerability. At the same time that there are these bad things happening, there's also potential benefits, but we need to actually figure out what those benefits are and actually deploy them and get them out there and figure out what some sort of business model is that doesn't rely on sucking people's attention in all the time.
Yeah, so I mean, I think just adding on to what he said, it's important that we figure out how to lead with a narrative as to what is possible and the transformative future that AI can enable. Right now, there is a lot out there as to it's a fear-based narrative, what the negative consequences could be, and people are afraid and they don't really have an exact understanding of where things stand. But when you look at what's actually happening, there are many positive applications for how AI can be used, for example, in educational technology to equalize opportunity and bring education to populations where it may otherwise not be, and to enable people who have learning disabilities to have tailored, personalized applications for how they learn. And there's also a real opportunity to, for example, integrate developmental science into how AI systems are designed for learning and education with children. So where are the developmental opportunities and vulnerabilities based on the science and psychologists and what educators know, and then how can that be integrated into the policies around design and development of AI, not only in toys, but in algorithmic systems that kids interact with on a regular basis online, and other types of things. So when you think about it in that way, there's a tremendous nudge potential, so to speak. I mean, teachers have always, and educators and parents, led and structured kids in one way or another. So you could think about how AI can look at, okay, what's happening at different developmental stages. You're 5, you're adolescent, you're emerging into adulthood, and how can it help to kind of enhance development in that way.
And I really like your point about avoiding the fear-based framing on AI. I think that metaphors are really powerful things. And one metaphor there are a lot of really sloppy ones that get used a lot with artificial intelligence. One that I've been trying to encourage people to use is parenting. We really are trying to parent new kinds of intelligent systems, and then it would be way more natural if we thought in those terms to think about how they fit into an education framework than to be running around and saying, oh, we're in some kind of race with other countries.
Yeah, I think just building on that, one of the things that I keep running into in this broad topic is, really the different thinking around, the problems we're trying to solve with machine learning, and really a lot of the practical optimization problems. And then, where there's a lot of fear and uncertainty is really in the artificial intelligence space. And I think one way to kind of frame that future is in a way not thinking of it as an artificial intelligence, but more artificial life. And in terms of the kind of long term, it's you're kind of building more self-sustainable autonomous decision-making entities that do have some sort of kind of built-in capability to make kind of important decisions. And so if you kind of frame it around artificial life rather than artificial intelligence, I feel like it kind of avoids some of the weird kind of dystopian science fiction kind of outcomes, because it's not really about like, maybe there is going to be some super intelligence kind of experience, but I think there's a lot of interesting work being done around say synthetic biology, and synthetic life that is leveraging a lot of machine intelligence right now, and I think that space is an interesting analog as well for kind of talking about decision making and morality and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Brian, you touched on this a little bit when you talked about the power of technology and the power that it's given us. So what I found as I looked into the topic is that it's much less about the technology and it's much more about us. But the issue being with the technology, we have more power, and so we have to think about ourselves a little more deeply. And so how do we translate those ethical principles? And Peter, you do this really well, where ethical principles into mathematical constraints. So how do we translate these principles and then realize how they're going to translate to the technology that we're building and the future that we're building? How does that work?
So 2 things we've learned. One is that capturing what humans mean by ethics is really complicated. Like children learn what it is to be good, and they learn different versions of it in different cultures and settings, and they're learning something very complicated. And so if you try to build an AI system where you program in ethics using a formula or a specification, you're going to get it wrong, and that's pretty inevitable. And so a lot of the sort of crazy fear-based the crazy super intelligence arguments assume that you write down a specification for the objective, and then it follows from that you are going to get it wrong and it's going to go out of control. So the first lesson you learn is, okay, instead learn what ethics is. Have a neural network that is just constantly guided by feedback and examples from humans, and we try to show it what good behavior is, what ethics is. The second piece is, and this is something that I've done some work on, is if you are sure about the right answer to ethical questions, you're making a terrible mistake. And so if you train your neural network to produce the right answer, then it's going to go wrong under some circumstances. Because the reality is that there are scenarios where the right answer is to be deeply torn and to feel like there is no good answer. And so you just need to make sure, mathematically speaking, that you build your neural network that's learning your ethics with that capability of being torn. And then I think, I'm not going to say it's clear sailing from there, but that's a good starting point for how to tackle the problem.
So I just wanted to add, so currently there are about 280 different ethical principles operating in this area, most of which are US or European based, I think 88%, and written in English. So there's, a problem of inclusivity with respect to the global south there, but there's also then the issue of figuring out how to standardize across these principles. And one of the things that we've talked about in the context of our Global AI Council is looking to see what's common across all of these different codes and figuring out if there might be a way to create some type of supracode drawing from what appears most commonly and what's most agreed upon in all of these different things. But I do think that, generally there is a big problem with respect to a multiplicity of standards. And then that can kind of track back to there not being, at least in popular narrative or corporate narrative, a defined meaning of what ethics is. So that can leave it open to being kind of malleable and defined variably depending on what corporate interests are, thereby not actually requiring that they change or restructure fundamental processes to comport with ethical objectives, but use it as more of a show to say, oh, look, we're doing this, and because we've decided that this is what ethics means. And I don't think that there are several potential solutions. I don't think that there's one solution for that. And being a human rights person, and we were having this debate a little bit earlier before, human rights is a system that has been negotiated with the interest of the individual first and foremost, as against a sovereign, so not a citizen, and has content to it and has mechanisms of measurement and accountability and balancing different concerns built into it. So for example, one of the big concerns with respect to AI is data and privacy, and people are concerned and have a lot of chatter in their heads as to, well, what's happening with my data? What are the implications? Is this going to affect me in my life in some way? But the reality is that AI is moving forward, and data is fundamental, at least right now, in how these systems are being designed and used to train these systems to do the good things and to enable the transformative potential of AI and where we want it to go. So we have to figure out a way to bring other concerns into the mix, the right to health and freedom of expression and other interests that may, in certain instances, rise above whatever privacy concerns are at play with the data exposure, particularly if you introduce mechanisms of anonymizing data or aggregating and anonymizing data and then creating insights that can help to solve big social challenges and public health issues.
So I think what I would add to that is that, pretty much everyone up here so far has said ethics is complicated, right? And that's true, because ethics is complicated. There's an infinite number of things that, humans can potentially be involved in doing. So there's this constant question mark of what am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? What should we do next? And that complexity is something that can be managed if you have the right the right tools and the right framework to subject that to. So human rights is a good framework. It's one framework. Every time you're managing complexity, you're also, you're trying to simplify the world to fit into your tool. So at the same time, what ethics does is it tries to have lots of different tools. And one of the great things I think about the way the world is now is that we have all the cultures around the world, and we can look at the way different cultures deal with different ethical problems, and we can look at those and we can say, we have lots of different tools here. Can we apply this to this problem here? Will this manage the complexity in a way that we think gives us a solution that works in this place?
So one really important tool that we're starting to really look at is this concept of algorithmic transparency, also called explainability, and it's really about trying to build in the notion of algorithms being able to explain how they were able to determine an outcome. And I think that this is a concept, just accountability, transparency is something that is critical as things get more and more complex. Because I think that, one of the big challenges is, that this whole world is fairly opaque, and it's really hard to get a clear sense of what the ingredients are that are driving the outcomes. And so, transparency is something that, I think is one step towards, having more clear accountability and starting to address some of that ethical concern.
And I just wanted to add, one point about explainability that I find to be really interesting and would be curious to know what the other panelists think is, as deep learning systems become more complex, it becomes more and more difficult to point to various data points or configurations and to how decisions were made. But on one hand, we want for these models to become more complex because it means that it supports an elevated performance, but on the other hand, it makes it more of a black box. So I think then we have to think about what are other ways that we can enable transparency that don't necessarily relate to algorithmic explainability at every point in the decision-making stage. And there are ideas, for example, a show your work approach as to, okay, well, what went into designing this algorithm and how were the engineers thinking about it at this stage and at that stage, and maybe having auditing run arounds at each point that can kind of show that things were being done in accordance with a policy or certain objectives from ethics or human rights, value-laden objectives in mind at each stage. And so I think that we want to think about the tension between performance and interpretability as deep learning systems evolve and algorithms become more complex.
I want to jump in and say the answer beautifully might be fractals. So, and I mean this in two different ways. So at a micro scale, if you look at a particular neural network and you started off with something simple and it was explainable, you could sort of like prod it and see the formula. But it got more and more complicated. It started being this sort of deep learning stuff with very large networks. Some of the most interesting work in understanding what those really complicated neural networks are doing is coming out of Chris Ola's team at OpenAI, and they're making these atlases of computer vision systems where you pluck individual neurons out of the network and say, well, what kinds of images are like activating or not activating, deactivating this particular neuron. And what you see are these crazy psychedelic fractals that nonetheless have some structure to them. And you can kind of see early on in the lower layers of the network, you get these very like simple geometric patterns, and later on you start seeing parts of cats and parts of dogs, maybe ears and eyes and things emerging in this very like dreamy kind of way. And so maybe we can use similar like mathematical trickery to extract the true forms of the things that neural networks are seeing in other domains, not just in vision. The other sense in which the answer is fractals is if what we're trying to get transparency out of is not a neural network, but is a giant corporation. If we're looking at like a Facebook or an Amazon and trying to figure out, is this huge company complying with these principles that it signed up for? The crazy answer is it's really hard to tell, even if you're on the inside. And one of the senior executives that we work with at one of those companies, the way he put it is like, it's herding cats, right? You've got 100,000 employees at this company. If we sign up to a principle that's really specific, not something that, like a vague general ethics statement is fine. But if it's a specific principle, we suddenly have to figure out which teams in this 100,000 person organization are not complying with the principle. And the amount of like work that you have to do to track everybody down and make sure that they're complying with the new principle you've signed up to is really hard. And there's like, it's not just like cat herding, it's like fractal cat herding, because within parts of the organization you have like whole other complicated dynamics going on. And so we found ourselves kind of at the partnership sort of setting up to be fractal cat herders. I don't know what we're going to do it with, like butterfly nets and things, but that's the task we have if we're going to try and get companies to comply with the principles that the rest of society wants them to.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that reminded me of I think there's a really interesting counterpoint to to the kind of untethered advancement of AI and machine learning, which is kind of human ego. And one thing we've been seeing in the business context is, we thought that we could just unleash these powerful machine learning algorithms to generate all this value. And what we found is a bunch of people who really want to understand what's going on. And in some ways, it's actually their job on the line, and the need for them to be able to communicate to their boss what's going on. And this is kind of like connected to the explainability track, but it's the kind of the human ego, it becomes this really interesting counterpoint to kind of untethered advancement in machine learning, or at least the ability to kind of like just let it go, right?
So I want to say two things in response to what Peter had said. I think that it highlights an important point, that when it comes to private sector development of AI and also the public procurement of privately developed AI, market incentives and morals are not enough. So ultimately, when you have these systems that are going to be making decisions about entitlements and benefits and opportunities that people are going to have in their lives or not, there has to be some mechanism of explainability that's translatable for just ordinary people. And that's something that the people who are designing the systems are going to have to figure out a way to bring forward in an, we've used the word explainable, and I think sometimes these terms can get kind of confused, but in a way that resonates and leaves people satisfied with important decisions that are made that dictate outcomes of their lives. And so you can think about it, interestingly enough, on the level of this project that we're doing, government procurement, and you think about if a government has a set of principles in place as to how they're going to vet AI technologies that they procure in the use of systems, so education, criminal justice, legal systems, then that sets the market terms for how the private sector is going to develop, or at least a swath of the private sector that would be interested in doing business with the government, which I think most companies are because it's fairly lucrative. So it sets the terms as to how they are going to or will need to design their technologies to be viable for government procurement. And then that has the effect of creating kind of a healthy market in that space, because other competitors who are interested in, maybe not government procurement, but just entering into the market, now they have a standard by which they need to also adhere, because that's set as to what will be required and what's expected of the technology in that space. So I think that, our position is definitely that there is a need for policy and for the government to have a role, but in consideration of the new balances of power and how these systems are designed and deployed, the private sector and corporations will also need to have a voice in helping governments to understand how to regulate and set a floor for how the industry can move forward.
And I think that's also, it's for companies of different sizes and different capabilities. And I'm on, to your point, there's a lot of human empathy to do to how these product teams on the ground having to deal with such heady, principles and such an important dialect. Great. So I love to move on now. We're going to get even further into the future of our time horizon here. There's a lot of fear about artificial intelligence. It's been called an existential crisis by philosophers like Sam Harris and practitioners like Nick Bostrom. And we touch a little bit on superintelligence and artificial general intelligence. So what are the real concerns with the future of AI? What are the principles we should be concerned about today in terms of what's coming in the future? I'm looking at you, Peter.
Me. Well, if you're setting out to build another intelligent life form, you should probably think really carefully about what you're doing. Now, we might not succeed, right? Like it is the stated ambition of much of the field to figure out a path towards that kind of future, and that's a really extraordinary, exciting thing to be watching, like some amount of progress towards. But I do think that if we are if we're going to be engaged in that project, we have to imagine what it would be like to succeed, and also what it would be like to succeed just partially, right? The existing machine learning systems we're deploying are successes along that road, and they have crazy unintended consequences already. So we need to practice like envisioning a weird future, thinking about it really carefully and from lots of different angles, and with a lot of uncertainty. Because the first thing you learn if you try to predict technology is that it's really hard to predict. And you need a lot of humility and just need to, aim for a batting average that's like slightly, above random. And then say, well, what are some things that we can do that we're not going to regret? Well, we're not going to regret encouraging machine learning engineers to think about ethics more systematically. We're not going to regret having that field be more diverse than it's been to date, because right now it's like disproportionately like young, often white men. So let's get a field that's got more perspectives inside it, and let's like recruit and change that field so that the thing that's getting built isn't just one perspective on life. Let's think carefully about unintended consequences and do a lot of technical research, and we have some work happening on this front to figure out how to get algorithms that spot unintended consequences for themselves and then turn around and ask the human, like, is this what you wanted? Rather than just kind of plowing ahead and making paperclips.
And I'm curious, so I know Brian, you're also looking at AGI and this world, but I'm also curious, Aina and Amon, is this something you think about, or you're more grounded in today?
Yeah, I think that just given the way that our projects are structured to address the issues as they're happening today and where we identify the priorities to be in global governance gaps with respect to AI that are going to be most immediate for enabling the future we want, our focus is kind of there. But Peter did say one thing that I wanted to add on, which I think one of the biggest challenges and issues today is inclusivity, is to ensure that the people who are designing AI systems and the data that it's being trained on is representative of the population on which the systems are going to be used. And that's a problem for multiple reasons. On the training and data side, with biased data sets, you create outcomes that aren't applicable and have a high likelihood to disfavor certain groups of people, leading to denial of civil liberties and other illiberal outcomes. But also, just thinking more broadly, people want to be involved in the conversation on AI, and I think that it is still a really exclusive set. They understand that this is something that's happening outside of their understanding or awareness, but that is going to fundamentally reorder the world around them. And that causes a lot of fear and confusion that leads to some of the outcomes that we've seen play out geopolitically today. So Freedom House has reported that for the past 8 years, democracy has been in decline in the US. And so, you think about, okay, those are the conditions that lead to the rise of authoritarianism, that lead to the spread of terrorism and other types of anti-democratic forces that we want to prevent for many reasons. So, you think about inclusivity and bias, and it's not just because we want to render good decisions in individual cases and be good people in our communities. It's because we want to enable healthy markets and stable societies and prevent war and kind of geopolitical collapse. So think about, and I think that this is one thing that I would hope that people can take away, is just think about AI and its implications on a systematic level and outside of maybe the specific context that you may be working or designing or operating in, or the specific industry, to see how it plays out more broadly.
There's a human opportunity here, right? And I think it brings a lot of, there's fertile ground for philosophy as well. Brian, on that note, I'd just love to hear your take from ethical principles and philosophical perspective on this subject.
Right. I think what I would say is that intelligence and power combined together give you choices, and ethics tells you which among those choices are good. And if we don't start making good choices, then guess what? You end up in a world that's not very good. So you have this, all of a sudden this power to do these things that you weren't able to do before. And then the question is, what are the right choices to make when you're in this new space? So I think this combination of ethics and technology is actually really a remarkable space. I think it's the most interesting space, which is why I'm studying it. But I think there's just a lot of opportunities here for us to get a new perspective on reality, basically. Take our old ethical systems, test them with the technology we have, and use the technology to hopefully make better moral decisions also, to get those two ethics and technology interacting with each other.
Yeah, so, I mean, just to go back into the kind of future part of that question. I'm not sure I'm totally sold on the superintelligence outcome.
How many of you are familiar with superintelligence, AGI? Familiar?
Yeah, so it's basically it's a point where there's kind of this intelligence ladder that transcends human intelligence, and then we become kind of enslaved by
the servants of the machine.
Yes. We become the ants and the low level. But I mean, I guess my point is, I'm not sure that humans are really smart enough to actually create a superintelligence, but I think that that we are plenty capable of creating kind of a fake superintelligence, which I think is actually my biggest concern, which is we've already seen kind of what happens when you anonymize people in the kind of web world and they become trolls and do all sorts of things because they're hiding behind anonymity. And I think that AI becomes this really powerful tool to hide behind and to do things that are not, that are totally unethical, but can be blamed, and be scapegoated instead of individuals being responsible. So I think that's where I have the biggest fears of AI just being, being an opaque force that is bringing a lot of kind of chaos.
Can I just say, I just find currently it could be interesting and fun to think about the AGI question, and a lot of people in here, myself included, probably like shows like Westworld, but I think ultimately it distracts from the fact that how we deal with the issues on the ground today and the designing of systems today that are AI systems today that are impacting and ordering people's lives is ultimately going to set the tone when and if the AGI conversation happens 50, 100, however many years down the road. So I think ultimately if you are concerned about what that world might look like, then the starting point is to look at the governance and regulations of AI technologies that would, or capabilities that would evolve to support that type of world. So for example, and we were talking about this before the panel started, if we start with inviolable principles of AI, and one of those might be that an AI can never impersonate a human being. So what that would mean right now is that all the different chat bots and things that you interact with that could be a human, it's always clearly identified, even if it is obvious to you, but clearly identified that that is not a human. And then you would see how as the technology advances and we move further towards a world of AGI, how establishing that principle as a norm would then filter into how that AGI came about. So I think it's much more important for us to educate people and keep them where we are today, so they can be focused on the opportunities that AI might bring for them in the evolution of work, which is the term that we're using now instead of the future of work, because that future is here and we're looking to negotiate how it's going to move forward. And also to kind of bring it out of the sci-fi fantasy realm and work with where we are today. But so that's where I stand on that.
So California passed a law to mandate that all chatbots be labeled as such, which is great. This seems like good policy. Though I think we should also add another category. It's not just like human or bot. like there is a category of cyborg, and that might sound weird, but we're interacting with cyborgs all the time now. If you go and like file a customer service request with lots of companies and institutions, you'll get back the kind of chatbot reply. But what is often going on is that you're interacting with a cyborg. So if the question you ask is one that's been asked before, or the natural language processing system that is handling the question understands it and is like, oh yeah, I've got the answer to that, it'll just give it to you. But whenever it doesn't understand, it will then route that to a human and get a human answer, and then put that in the database of answers for the future. So that's a really common pattern, and it can really scramble people's intuitions, because if you're interacting with a system like that and you don't know what it is, and you kind of get the sense that it's a little bit bottish, like it's got that flavor to it, but then when you prod it in a funny way, it gives you a really human reply. Your intuitions are going to be, oh, AI is way more advanced at this language, like conversational stuff, than I thought it was. And so I think labeling those systems as cyborgs for people could be really helpful in trying to get our intuitions to line up with the world we're living in.
Well, so we've talked a lot about lots of heady subjects here. I'd love to know, like, for an audience perspective, I'm from a design practitioner. Sometimes I feel slightly overwhelmed by both the topic and then who owns the topic, which is big data, the big companies. I'm not Facebook or Google. I sometimes feel I don't have a say, but we are ethical, individually responsible human beings. So what can we do as sort of regular practitioners, and how can we create a better future? And Aina, you were touching on this earlier, but so what can we do as individuals to make a better and more ethical landscape as individual beings? Yeah, I love to hear a professor of ethics here.
So I think that one of the things that's interesting about artificial intelligence is that it allows us to take intelligence in our heads and externalize it into these outside objects from us, and then accelerate them to vast speed and do all these other really interesting things with them. And that all of a sudden then makes us ask questions about ourselves and our own identity, and who are we? Is it intelligence that makes us human, or is it something else that makes us human? I think that what we should think about when we're doing we're looking at artificial intelligence is realize that actually intelligence isn't the most important thing about being human. What's much more important is caring for each other, our relationships with each other, all these other things which are much more complex and intangible and difficult to figure out. You're not going to just be able to make a bot that is going to be able to care about you and feel like it's a family member or something like that. People are trying for sure, but to a certain extent, we're always going to know that's not a real human being. We're everybody in this room, we're the real human beings here. We're the ones who need to be thinking about what is going to keep us human in this world that we're creating that's going to be very complex. It's going to be continuing to get more and more complex as we go forward.
So I think one thing that people can do, if you're working in the private sector, designing AI, or at a company in which AI is predominant, think about what are the conditions to enable the positive development of what I'm doing, not just here at the company on the individual level of me and my colleagues and the leadership, but what would really be needed in this industry to accomplish the broader goals, to serve democratic objectives, to serve humanity more broadly, if that's what you care about and what you're interested in. And so then think about it more systematically, and then look to see how you can support that by throwing your political momentum behind certain types of initiatives that would support, for example, creating a regulatory floor in your industry, which would make sure that bad actors or practitioners who weren't as concerned with the things that are important to you could undercut the market and thereby create systems that could be sold and procured for less, and kind of throw apart the whole notion of being able to operate ethically. And I think that this is where policy has one of the strongest potentials, and where business would actually welcome policy. I've heard a lot of business practitioners say, well, we want to do these things, but if so-and-so competitor X comes in and decides that they want to do it that way, then we have to still figure out a way to be able to be relevant and compete and be in the market. Otherwise, we're going to be at a disadvantage and to our shareholders and other things like that. So I think, and you see companies like Microsoft, for example, doing this, but figuring out how you can educate yourself and then educate other people and move it forward as to what would be needed for you to operate effectively as a business practitioner in the world that you want to see.
I really hear Amon's answer to this question. I almost asked you before. Like you have this case where you're running a company, and there are some really cool things you can do, and some ways in which you're worried about the consequences. Like, how do you steer the ship in a constructive direction?
Yeah. So sometimes I feel like I may be a little bit naive about the power of being able to leverage technology to change kind of culture. But I think in general we have especially in this country, we have a fairly kind of corrupt business culture. It's definitely morally kind of devoid. But I think it's really built around this notion of a continual kind of revenue ramp that never ends, and that kind of just has a huge implication into the
Wait, that
ethics.
is a misaligned AI.
but I think
What do you investors say about that, Amin?
but I think there's actually an opportunity to leverage machine intelligence to help change the perception of value, and I think that's something that is not something we can kind of accomplish really quickly, but there's actually a nature of kind of machine learning and machine intelligence that's about understanding the bigger picture, and so taking in more ingredients, more of the big picture, we can actually leverage machine intelligence to potentially change business culture and to focus more on long-term engagement, long-term kind of customer happiness, things like that.
Well, yeah, thank you. And I want to say, as I talk to each of you individually, you guys gave me a lot of hope because you're thinking about this in thoughtful ways and questioning the underlying system. Sometimes I think we'll worry we're out there under a system that's rigged and a machine that's not working in our favor, and we have to be capitalists, and we have to think about our business objectives, and we have to think about our personal careers, and so it's hard to deliberate on what's ethical and what's right. But you guys are really thinking hard about this stuff, and what's exciting as well is that we're turning this issue about technology to rethink about ourselves, and this is very much a human issue. So I could talk about this all day, but I think our time is up. As Jorge has been timing me over there, thank you so much. It's time to go. Otherwise, he's going to spray me with water, and not them, unfortunately. But thank you so much, and please give them a round of applause. It was so great. And Jasmine, I'm going to go over there. I'd love to see what you've been doing, and maybe tell us a little bit about what you capture there from that conversation.
Like a crazy person. So many quotes. I think the big thing I walked away from that was it's important to lead with a narrative of what is possible. It felt like the thing that resonated the most, and that it's really easy to think of the negative when you think of AI. So it gave me a lot of hope. I've watched some scary movies, so yeah, I would say that was the big thing, and inclusivity.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Jasmine. And we'll have this up later. Todd's going to send us an email of the digital form. And I want to thank Aina helped us reframe that. I went into ethical problems, and she's like, opportunities. We got to talk about opportunities. So I'm glad hope was a big takeaway tonight. So we have room for a few questions. I think 3 questions before we go into our workshop.
All right, so we got 3 questions. We're going to try to be as diplomatic about this as possible. So one on this side, one on that side, and one in the back. First thing I saw.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay, it goes in and out. So my name's Jamie. I'm sure you've seen me at some of these AI LA events. I would actually have a pretty straightforward question. It might have a little bit of a build up to get there. So I've been really fascinated in neuroscience and specifically human bodies. And one thing I've learned is that human bodies actually use a lot of introspection, create emotion, and then actually create a thought. So it's kind of in reverse of what most of us think we have control over. And that actually explains a lot of why we're sometimes rational and sometimes irrational. And one of the things I've noticed about AI is that it's assumed that it's sort of coming in the opposite direction, that we're giving a list of instructions, it's very rational, it's going to behave in that way, which is interesting. But clearly human beings are not quite that way. So I guess my question is, what sort of are you thinking about, are you working about when it comes to sort of how humans create their sense of the world versus how AI is creating a sense of the world, and where AI can actually be used maybe as a force for sort of like promoting compassion over things like fear-based sort of decision making? So that's kind of where I am with that question.
I think one of the interesting stories about the field of artificial intelligence is that back when it started in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, people thought they could do this kind of top-down logical catalog of like all the things we know, and like how you teach a computer program, or how you write a computer program that does logical inference on the world and figures out what things must be true from the premises you gave it. And it turned out that just doesn't work. Logic cannot describe a world as weird and complicated as the one we live in, and it always breaks. And so the recent rapid progress in the field has not come from that kind of top-down logical prescription of the world, but from this like incredibly like messy soup of we're just gonna like look at patterns in things and see which patterns can like glue together to start making sense of anything. So this is like the primordial sludge that like formed on planet Earth, gradually starting to understand anything at all. And then it's really impressive that you like have the concept of an apple, not that you'd expect it to be logical. And so, like, then how do you get to compassion? I think it's a very different question. Like, that's a question about how do we wisely make technology, software, apps that serve the ends of compassion. I don't think that's yet an AI question. It's more of a kind of technology design question.
I would say I really like the philosophical aspect of that question, because you're right. There's going to be some fundamental differences in the way AI acts compared to the way humans act, and that's going to lead to AI being very alien in a lot of ways. It's going to seem very different from us. It's going to make decisions that don't make sense. It's going to fail in ways that aren't expected. I mean, this is fairly widely known stuff that everybody knows about. But I'm not sure that can go away. I'm not sure exactly how. I mean, obviously people come up with workarounds to make it more and more intuitive, hopefully, but at the same time it's still not going to be coming about it in the same way that a human does.
Hi. In many sectors, AI can create a lot of efficiencies and create a lot of value for businesses, but one implication of that is a loss in jobs, right, in the workforce. How do you all think about rationalizing the potential impact on the workforce and potentially redeploying labor to compensate for AI's effect?
So I think there are very few jobs in which 100% of the functionality can be assumed by an AI. And I think the way I'm thinking about it is in terms, again, of opportunity. Can we automate out certain elements that aren't tasks human beings are really that great at doing, that they enjoy doing, that they're intended to be doing to serve themselves as bearers of human dignity, and augment human capabilities in a way that creates new positions within the market that are more fulfilling and challenging and enjoying, and sort of how can we maybe take out the work that isn't great and use AI to create these hybrid forms of opportunities for people.
Guys, before the last question, you're getting some papers, and I sense some confusion. So we're having a workshop. This is for self-reflection. Part of the workshop is going to ask you to write something down, but it's for your own sake. Don't worry, you don't have to share it. And we're going to get to that in a minute. So we're just passing out the materials. One more question.
I was going to like jump in with one quick point on this. The partnership has studied this phenomenon of labor displacement a little bit, and it does seem quite plausible that we could be facing it. In 10, 20 years, we could really see massive, if not, it's possible that there will just be less jobs, and it's possible that they'll just move enormously around the economy. Either of those is possible, and in which case, you at least need massive support for people to change their careers. And potentially, we might need to figure out how to have human lives that are less organized around the Protestant work ethic, and still figure out how to give people like a sense that there's structure, they're doing something important, that they have goals. And I think that, I don't have an answer to that, but I think it's a really interesting question.
It's definitely a priority, I think, for everybody who's looking at these issues, at least from a policy perspective. In our Global AI Council that we have that convenes leaders from all sectors of society to kind of think about these issues, that was one of the things that was very much identified as a priority. Academics and business leaders and world leaders all kind of thinking about what are we going to do and how are we going to address this. And I just want to add one other point that I think a huge enabler of it will be changing our educational system. So educating people in ways that teach them to be more emotionally resilient and entrepreneurial and able to change careers or expect to change careers more times within their lives and kind of shift. And currently our educational systems aren't set up or haven't been set up to support those capabilities developing on a wide scale. So I think that's kind of one key component on a systematic level that can help to ensure whatever the future evolution of work looks like, that it be moving in the positive direction.
Yeah, really quick. I'm actually really terrified of the impact of like self-driving cars in particular. I think it could create a sudden, massive shift of workforce, and I think that that fast-moving change of workforce, I think, would have really a difficult impact. So I think that's one thing that I worry about with a lot of these advances is they aren't coming gradually. There's going to be a point where there's a huge impact.
Hi. I'm not sure I'll get this question right, but is there any consideration for how the baseline of our morals and ethics could evolve in the future in a scenario where humans' considerations of what moral is may become irrelevant to whatever the future of AI dictates?
God, I love this question. This is something, yeah, this is a good question. I mean, this is something that one of my favorite philosophers, Hans Jonas, has been talking about for a long time, which is that basically, because human action has become so broad in scope now, it's very difficult to know what's going to happen next. I mean, we're in this state of what Shannon Valor, who's one of my colleagues, calls acute technosocial opacity, which means that the future becomes very, very obscure. And based on that, it's very difficult to make a rule-based system, for example, to deal with that. Instead, what you need to have are decision makers. We don't know what's going to be in the future, but if we're going to be there, we're the people who have to make those decisions. So based on that, and if we're getting into the situation where things become very complicated, morality might start becoming more complicated than humans can handle. In that case, we're going to have to start relying on machine systems. They might start making decisions that seem complicated and obscure to us also. There are all sorts of weird things that could happen. I think that one of the things we're going to discover is that morality is going to get much more complicated, and we're going to have to specialize a lot more in trying to figure out how to solve certain sorts of problems.
Oh my gosh, I really feel the opposite way about this. Brian, yeah. So I think that it's going to get probably easier. I think that human morality is a really fluid thing. It's very responsive to the problem and the circumstances. And that one of the challenges we face in the current historical and political moment is that our scale of action has gotten really large, but our scale of empathy and ability to understand other people's perspectives has not. And so we're like trying to engage in politics to reach agreement with people whose lives are unrecognizably very different than ours, and whose agendas and interests are very different than ours. And so we're really distressed by their voting decisions, for instance. And I think that AI could really help both to get different groups of people to understand where other groups of humans are coming from, and also to spot ways in which you just don't have to have certain fights. Like people living in rural areas of the United States or other parts of the world don't need to like live the same lives as people living in cities with urban values. Like, and technology could help us to get past impasses that arise in politics because of those differences in perspective. So I'm kind of an optimist. I think like more emotional empathy through technology, human understandings of morality will do just fine for the next 1,000 years, and because they'll adapt. And I'm an optimist here.
So I'm going to say I'm not necessarily a pessimist. I'm just saying it's going to get complicated.
And I just want to say, so I think that the core truths of human dignity will always remain the same. But I think the theories as to what enable those will change depending on what our technological capabilities are. So, for example, if you think about freedom of speech, what is that? How did that come about? What is it meant to enable? Some idea of liberty and democracy, and that used to be served and has been, continues to be, by this marketplace of ideas. So, you know, we have, people here may have heard of that, it's fairly common vernacular, but you have, you know, John Locke sort of, okay, the marketplace of ideas, everybody can speak, and then the truth will emerge from the debate and the conversation that's happening by everything being brought forward. Well, today we have an information overload, so you can think about how speech is, and what speech is intended to enable when it comes to democracy would actually be served by a different theory that accounts for the defining characteristics of social media and public discourse as it happens online. So I think that helps answer your question.
Yeah, I think just to add to the kind of optimistic perspective, I mean, I feel like you know, personal intelligent agents will likely become a big part of our lives to help us navigate the increasingly complex world. And one way to think of that is almost like, you know, potentially kind of like a guardian angel type kind of metaphor of, you know, really helping protect you in ways that, you know, you're very vulnerable today. I think there's a lot of downsides to that, but there's also, I think, a lot of upside.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Great. So last but not least, we got our friend Jenny here, and she's going to make us think a little bit about what we think about morality. So we've heard a lot from the experts, but now we're going to get your brains thinking. And without further ado, Jenny, please give a round of applause for Jenny.
Hi, everybody. I had some slides up. Okay. And this is a clicker? Yeah, that's fine. Oh, but I got secrets. There we go. Don't reveal the secrets, bro. Yeah. That's good. That's fine. That's fine. Hello, everybody. Thank you, AILA, for having me. It's really an honor to be following such an amazing panel. I really learned a lot. I'm really excited to be here. I'm gonna take you through a moral bias workshop, and this is really an introduction to moral foundations theory, and then we'll quickly touch upon how this can help us inform our design process. Did I say my name? My name's Jenny Liang. And And so today we're going to talk about what makes something right or wrong. And in red, which is a little hard to read, the words here are why and how might this inform what we create. So this is the objective, what I hope to share with you in the next 30, 40 minutes. So I want you to get ready. This is gonna be kind of interactive, so I want you to clear your brain, take a deep breath. Everybody should have a card and a piece of paper. And I'm gonna get my timer ready. And so we have 2 writing exercises, so it's gonna be a minute, and then we're gonna dive right in, okay? Everybody ready? No. Okay. Who needs pens? They're gonna pass them to you. Pens. Okay, cool, thank you. Oh yeah, and also props to Charlie and Jorge for getting this to everybody. I really appreciate your help. That's awesome. Okay, let's get started, okay? In 1 minute, I want you to take a second to think about 3 to 5 words that best describe you, okay? And they don't have to be the end-all, be-all, just whatever you can think of, 3 to 5 words that describe you in 1 minute, okay? Go ahead. Okay, that's a minute. It's awesome to see that some of you know exactly who you are, and some of you thought pretty deeply about it. Okay, we're gonna come back to your answers to this in a minute. Now the next thing I want you to do is just reflect for a second on something, the last time you experienced something morally wrong. And this can be something that someone did morally wrong to you, or something maybe that you witnessed, okay? So just take a minute, think about what it is, and then just make a note of it, okay? You don't have to describe the whole thing. Just make a note of it so you remember what it is later. Okay, that's 1 minute. Thank you. We're going to come back to this in a minute, okay? So let's dive into some content. The stuff I'm going to show you today is based in moral foundations theory, and this is credited to Jonathan Haidt. So just to get you a little oriented, if you want to know about it, he wrote a really great book about it called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, which I really like. So you can see here. Let's get started with an exercise. So I have an exercise for you that we're all going to do it together, okay? I'm going to read you a couple of scenarios on the board, and I want you to raise your hand if you think it's wrong, okay? If you hear the scenario and you think, this is cool, I don't have a problem with that, keep your hand down. If you feel like it's wrong, raise your hand, okay? We're all going to do this, okay? Everybody ready? Okay, great. While walking, a man saw a dog sleeping on the road. He walked up to it and kicked it. Who thinks that's wrong? Okay, a lot of people raising their hands here, A father said to his son, "If you do well on the exam, I will buy you a pen." The son did well on the exam, but the father did not give him anything. Okay, that's a lot of hands, but not everybody. Okay. A young married woman went alone to see a movie without informing her husband. When she returned home, her husband said, "If you do it again, I will beat you black and blue." She did it again. He beat her black and blue. The husband, how many people think the husband is wrong? Okay, that's almost everybody here. A man had a married son and a married daughter. After his death, his son claimed most of the property and his daughter got little. How many people think the son is wrong for claiming most of the property here? Okay, maybe about half more, a little uncertainty though, okay. And then in a family, a 25-year-old son addresses his father by his first name. Anybody raise your hand if you think this is morally wrong? Okay, one person back there. A woman cooked rice and wanted to eat with her husband and his elder brother. Then she ate with them. Does anybody here think that this is a moral offense, morally wrong? Okay, nobody. A widow in your community eats fish 2 or 3 times a week. Raise your hand if you think this is morally wrong. Okay, one person back there is outraged. All right. Last one. After defecation, a woman did not change her clothes before cooking. All right. Another outraged person here. Okay. All right. So we just did a little exercise. Let's get this. What did we notice? Culture? Say more.
Well, I think some of those things that were wrong would be considered morally wrong in certain cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Not morally wrong in this group.
Awesome. We're done. We can all go home. We had one other comment there? Yeah, we agree. A lot of us agree. Lack of context, that really makes a big difference. Yeah. Again, lack of context, right? You guys have some very insightful observations. Yes? Something logical and morally wrong doesn't align? What do you mean? I mean, you probably felt a little grossed out, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's a great observation. Okay, last two. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep, you guys are awesome. I can just go home. Okay, last one. Oh, interesting. Yep. Yeah, interesting. Okay, I'm going to come back to that. That's awesome. Okay, so what we just did is a little tiny taste of research work that Jonathan Haidt did in Bhubaneswar, Odisha, which is a state in eastern India, and Chicago, Illinois. So what he did is he presented this along with many other potentially ethically fraught scenarios to adults and children in both cities. And here's what he found. He found that among Americans and Indians, there were some things that both Americans and Indians agreed were wrong, right? So kicking the dog, not following through on your promise, everybody agreed on it, right? And then we were pretty unanimous here in that, like, beating your wife is kind of not cool, and maybe here it was a little more ambiguous, right? So these were all things that Americans were like, wow, that is wrong. And when Indians saw this, they were like, what? Why is that even coming up? And maybe they had some of the laughing reactions that you guys had over here on these items. And these were all items that Indians felt were just like horrible moral violations. And Americans, we just don't even imagine that. Like, I think most people, when they see this, it's completely surprising that it's even there. Go ahead. Oh, yeah, okay. So the widow and the fish is that in this culture, once your husband dies, you're not allowed to remarry. And fish is considered a hot food that excites the passions. And so if you are eating fish as a widow, you're kind of a hussy, you know? Like, that's not okay, right? Did you have a question? I was not able to find the full description of why that was, but I believe that is a subversion of the moral order. So, like, you're not respecting norms of who hangs out with who. So in Eastern India, you're not supposed to have, like, what the familial dinner where we all sit down to dinner and have this experience all together, that is not something that's normal in Eastern India. So, and then, like, yeah, the family norms of who hangs out with who is not the same. And I was able to find that husbands are supposed to avoid the elder sister of their wife, and wives are supposed to avoid the elder brothers. So, I mean, that's, yeah, very unintuitive to us, but a grave moral violation in East India. Okay, so the question is why, right? And we've kind of talked a little bit about this. And what Haidt found in his research is that all of the moral violations that he found, and anytime somebody said something was wrong, really boiled down to 6 what he called moral foundations, or reasons why something could be wrong, right? So the first one is something is wrong if you're harming people, and it's morally virtuous if you're taking care of somebody, right? Something is wrong if you're cheating somebody, and it's morally virtuous if you're being more fair, right? If you're betraying someone or not following through with your commitments, that's morally wrong. And if you're being loyal, that's virtuous, right? And subverting the authority, so this is the thing with the elder brother, then that's wrong. Purity, or degrading the body, and then liberty and oppression. And this one has not officially made it to foundationhood, but is still considered among them. So yeah, of all of these things, of anything that could be wrong according to this theory in the world, they all boil down to these 6 reasons, right? So let's look at this one. While walking, the man kicking the dog. Can you guys guess which foundation? Why? Yeah, harm, right? And then, that's right. And then this one, fairness, right? Fairness. And it's also kind of a betrayal, right? Because, yeah, it's a little unfair and it's a betrayal, right? So I'll go through in the interest of time, I'll go through the other ones. So this one was really interesting because from an Indian perspective, it's morally virtuous because the husband is maintaining the social hierarchy of being in charge, and the wife, by disrespecting her husband, she is the one who's in the wrong, right? But here in the United States, we consider husband and wife to be equal, and it's not cool to beat on each other, right? So what's good and virtuous in India could be something that's really horrible here, right? And then this one here, similar thing, right? Like similar thing of like the son rightfully claims ownership to all of the inheritance, but here we think inheritance should be split more fairly. About half of you believe that, and then the other half were kind of thinking about how good of a daughter she was. Like, was she a jerk? Maybe she didn't deserve anything, right? Which is still kind of fair, right? Still rooted in fairness. And then this one, this is really like, disrespectful to your parents. So when I ran this workshop for another client on Tuesday, there was like one person from Korea who was like, I think that's wrong. And then this one is also, we talked about this one, and then we talked about that one, and this is a purity thing, right? So 5 moral foundations, right? These 5 moral foundations, and then liberty and oppression. So I want you to go back to your exercise and the morally wrong thing you experienced. Can you tie it back to one of the foundations of why it's wrong? Yes. Yes. Yeah. So if anybody has one that doesn't fit one of these 6, I want to know it afterwards, okay? Remind me. Okay. So from this, you guys caught on a lot of it in what you noticed, right? Culture plays a big difference. It's not universal, and what can be totally right in one culture and one context and in one mood can be wrong in another, right? So why is this happening? What's going on, right? And I think we generally like to think that we are, when we're deciding whether something's right or wrong, we're really thinking about, like, what's the rational reason? Let me go through my 6 reasons of fair, as long as nobody gets hurt and as long as it's fair, it's cool, right? We usually think of it as a really rational process. But in Haidt's research, he found that that's not actually the case, right? And as you saw when we were going through all those things, when you saw that a husband was beating his wife, you didn't say, oh, well, let me think about that. Somebody's getting harmed and that's probably wrong. You just had this quick flash of like, ugh. It's a really emotional intuition that really drove your sense of why, your sense of that being wrong. And then the reasoning of why it is wrong comes afterwards, right? And so he really characterizes our moral mind as kind of a rider and an elephant, right? Where you have this intuition, and once you have the intuition, you have reasoning that backs it up, right? So it's like a rider who's riding an elephant. The rider really thinks that they're in charge and making all the decisions, but it's really the elephant that's making the decisions, the subconscious intuitions. And the rider actually acts more like a lawyer that justifies whatever the elephant decides after the fact, after the decision has been made, okay? So, and then this intuition, it comes from a lot of things that are kind of arbitrary, right? So as you saw, we all have different experiences in our life, but like our culture, being here in the United States, really drove a lot of the decisions, right? But as you saw, there wasn't total homogeneity either, right? There were little variations within this group, right? And so your morality is largely driven by the culture and environment you're in, but it also may be affected too by the experiences you have, right? And maybe some of your individual personality, right? So I think the driving point here is that like so much of our morality is unconscious and kind of arbitrarily defined, and it's not this process of emotional reasoning, right? So here's this where, we start with the emotion, we have the judgment, we make a reason for it after the fact, and then that helps us articulate what the judgment is, right? So once we have this subconscious moral judgment, we justify it, and then we solidify what it is. We've rationalized it, and then we confirm it as right or wrong, right? So this process is so fast for us, right? And we like to convince ourselves that it's a process of rational deliberation. But in this research shows that it isn't, right? So, oops, this is still giving away my secrets. So do people's moral sensibilities follow any patterns, right? So it turns out that it does, right? So here's a graph of liberals versus conservatives. This is driving me bananas. Let's move this here. Okay. So it turns out that liberals versus conservatives care differently about each moral foundation. I have to double check. I think it is, but I'd have to confirm. So liberals tend to care more about harm and fairness, right? And they are not so interested in authority, liberty, and purity, right? And conservatives tend to be caring more balanced about all of them, right? And yeah, so I think it's interesting to see that we all, so the explanation goes that each of these foundations is kind of like taste buds, right? We are all equipped to taste the 5 flavors on our tongue, but some of us really like spicy food, and some of us are really into salty food, you know, and in this case, liberals really love care and fairness, and conservatives like a little bit of everything, right? So, why? Why would this be, right? Why would we act like this? And it turns out our moral sensibilities give us evolutionary advantages for our health and our collaboration, right? So the theory goes that we are hardwired to care about these 6 things because over our evolutionary development as a species, they have given us specific advantages to develop these sort of sensibilities. So if you look at the 6 foundations, right? Purity, right? If I'm hardwired to be grossed out about having children with my brother, like that's going to be better for my genes in the long run, right? So that's kind of an advantage there. And then in terms of collaboration, right? If I'm hardwired to want to care for you and be disgusted by seeing someone harm you, and I know that you are really into fairness and you're hardwired to be loyal and feel bad if you betray me, then I'm much more likely to trust you to watch my children guard my crops while I go hunting, or whatever primitive state that would be, right? So, and then if we're all following the same rules, right, and we respect the rules and we're inherently disposed to respect the same rules, then we're going to collaborate much more efficiently, right? And so, and then similarly, like if you're going to treat me, and if you're going to ask my permission for something before you do it, that's going to make it a lot easier. And if I know you want to do that, that's going to make it easier for me to collaborate with you. So all of these dispositions we have to care about these really help us collaborate as a species, and in that sense it can be really optimistic because we do have this similar wiring and similar understanding of what it is to care about each different thing and believe something is right and wrong, right? We just care about and prioritize some of the things more than others, and that's where we differ, right? So why? What makes some people care more about some foundations than others, right? Why would people in Korea really love spicy food and people in Wisconsin want to eat less spicy food, right? And the research shows that the weirder you are, the more likely you're to have a liberal sensibility, right? And so this is this weird stands for an acronym called Western, which my students tell me now is a controversial term, so it's in quotes. Educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, right? So societies like this that have more of these aspects tend to have a certain kind of moral sensibility, whereas and the reason of that is the weirder you are, the more you see the world full of separate objects rather than relationships, right? And so how you see the world is another thing that's really driving whether you think something is right or wrong. And so in weird societies, we tend to see everybody as an autonomous individual, right? And so because of that, our moralities and our rules for how to be moral are based on ethical, individualistic, universal rules that apply to everyone, right? However, non-weird cultures see themselves as members of a group or institution, right? And because of that, most of their rules around what's morally virtuous really rely on relationship-specific duties, right? So take a second to think about that and then go to this next. Remember, you wrote down the 3 to 5 words, right, that described you. How many of you wrote words that are describing you in a specific relationship, right? So how many of you wrote things like, I'm a mother, I'm a parent, I'm an employee, I'm a citizen? Did anybody write any words that are relational? Yep. Yeah, a couple. Yeah, so a few people do, right? But, and if we were in India, you would be much more likely to have these relationship-specific descriptors of yourself, whereas here it's much less likely, right? Any questions so far? You guys tracking with me? Okay, good. So, obviously, this is a very quick whirlwind introduction to this theory, and you just raised your hands. But if you wanted to go much more deeply into this, you can go to a website called yourmorals.org and take quizzes about different scenarios and whether you think they're terribly wrong or totally acceptable. And you can see what kind of moral sensibilities you have. Right? So this was my profile, and you can see I'm pretty liberal until it gets to purity, and then I'm a little more conservative, and then liberty. So I showed this a couple days ago, and someone says, apparently you hate freedom. and I said, that's not true. I just like structure, right? And then I thought, and they said, well, would you like a really totalitarian structure? And I said, no. And what this is really saying is that, I'm willing to give up a little bit of liberty if nobody gets hurt, right? So if something's low here, it doesn't mean you hate freedom. It just means, like, when you're deciding whether something's morally wrong, you're much more likely to prioritize one of the other ones. Yeah. I would direct that to Brian, actually.
So that's a good empirical question. I don't know the answer to it. There are probably studies that have been done on that, but I just don't know the answer.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yes. Oh. Wow. Yeah. 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 That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Oh, I love that. I'm going to add that in. Okay. All right. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. I think I wouldn't know the specific psychological mechanics of that, but that absolutely is a phenomenon with mobs and all these things about people. Yeah, there has been a lot of research. Yep. Man, I have a lot of opinions on that for sure, but I wouldn't consider myself the expert. Personally, I'm like an avid On Being listener, so I hear a lot on there. But yeah, so I'd probably punt that one, and maybe we could talk a little more about it on a personal level afterwards. Okay, and I will get going. So, okay, thank you, by the way, for your comments. So yeah, so hopefully now you have like more of an answer to what makes something right or wrong, right? And now the question is why, right? I think you have some understanding of why that might be. And then what about how might this inform how we create things, right? How do we apply this? There's like so much complexity and arbitrariness. Like, how do we actually translate this into something we can design for, right? And so this is a process that I teach to my students at Otis to kind of like get them started on this, right? It's not a recipe for success, but it's just a way to get started to grappling with some of this complexity. So when you're designing a product or service or technology, you want to think about who are the players who might hold the moral sensibilities, right? And then understand what their priorities are, because your priorities and who you are going to dictate what morality you have. So from there, you analyze the morals you have. And then from there, you reflect on your agenda, right? If everybody's into beating their wives, that doesn't mean you have to be into that either, right? So you reflect on your agenda and understand, like, okay, I understand that there's a lot of variation in morality or a lot of homogeneity in the morality of the people who I serve, right? And then from there, you can be more informed about the solutions you design. So this was like a workshop, that a worksheet that I created to kind of just help walk students through this process of analysis that I thought would be helpful, just really like anticipating any conflicts and any sides that come up, writing writing what their priorities are, and then systematically going through each foundation and asking who falls within or outside of their care, right? What priorities are important and familiar in what they consider fair? Who are they loyal to? What authority do they respect, and so on, right? So really taking a second to go through systematically. And so if you go through systematically through each one, and for each person, and then write the position on the conflict, then you're much more likely to have a more thorough audit of the different perspectives and how they might vary. And this makes you more informed and getting away from just your own intuition when you're designing, okay? And so in closing, I wanted to just throw this provocation out there, which was lovely, wonderfully articulated by Peter, so I don't know if he's still here, but just this idea of like, could we use AI to design experiences that build empathy for other moral sensibilities, right? So like if we understand the variations, we have all this technology that can surface different content that's personalized to your own morality. Could you use this to help people understand like the big variation? So this was kind of a dream project of mine, so I thought I'd put it up there for this community to see if anybody wanted to work on it. So that is the workshop. I look forward to discussing with you afterwards. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Amazing, thank you. All right, everybody, you guys enjoy yourselves tonight? Woo! Before we wrap up, I just wanted to thank, again, all of our volunteers, all of our amazing speakers, our amazing moderator, our amazing illustrator, facilitator, workshop, and then especially Charlie. So where's Charlie here? So Charlie has been kicking butt and live streaming photography. He's basically our content producer of AILA. He had just graduated high school. He's now going off to Purdue. This is his last AILA event, and he's been really doing a lot of great work for us behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. And can we give it up for Charlie, please? He's a guy with the camera around his neck, but wish him luck. Hopefully he'll come back to LA soon. Please hire him. But yeah, definitely, but yeah, thank you all for coming out. We take July off. August will come back on August 13th with a cool happy hour. More details to come. It'll be in downtown. And then in September, we'll be focusing on moonshots. Actually, we'll be here. We'll be focusing on, seriously, ambitious projects and aerospace. And then in October, we'll be in Pasadena during Innovate Pasadena, focusing, doing an entire health summit. So anyone here was at the Earth Summit, maybe? A few? So basically, we're doing a similar format of that, where we're going to be doing an all-day event where we bring in hospitals, service providers, all different types of multidisciplinaries to really help workshop a lot of different big problems when it comes to mental health, cancer, pediatrics, and a number of other different sectors within the healthcare and biotech sphere. And so we'll be doing that in October. If you want to get more involved, please let me know. And it's an all-day event, which will then lead into a 3-day hackathon. And so we're trying to, see how much good we can do within 4 days. And yeah, so if you care about health, please come out. But before all that, you'll definitely hear more about that through the email. If you're not on our email newsletter, just go to joinai.la, sign up. We'll probably send out another survey. Thank you all, whoever did, if any of you did fill out our mid-year impact survey. Thank you so much for that. That really does help us understand exactly what you want, how we can do our job better, and really make this a community that you want to be part of. And so, thank you so much, all. Please get home safe. There is still, you can be here for another hour. There's still a little bit more food, definitely more drinks. Please meet each other. Please expand outside this rooms. Keep on doing good. And again, thank you so much. Keep on coming back. Get home safe. Thank you.